Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar on how to cope with strong emotions using some skills from a type of therapy called Dialectical Behaviour Therapy. My name is Dr. Anastasia Hronis. I am a clinical psychologist and I work both clinically and in academia doing research. And I really wanted to do this video, which is part of a series of videos I have on dialectical behaviour therapy, because I think it is a really important therapy type that teaches us so many different skills. So today I'm really going to be focusing on how we can manage and work with particularly strong and intense emotions when we do feel and experience these. But if you do have a look at some of the other videos, we cover a number of other modules within dialectical behaviour therapy, or DBT for short. So we also look at what is this concept of dialectics, which essentially, I guess I can sum down to being balanced thinking. We look at the concept of mindfulness and the skills attached to mindfulness. We look at sort of general day-to-day emotion regulation and emotional literacy. And then there's also a module and a video on interpersonal skills and how we can be most effective in our interactions with other people. But today we're really focusing on those crucial, strong, intense emotions that we all experience at times, some of us more than others, and looking at how we can best manage and cope when we do find ourselves in situations where we are experiencing strong emotions. Now, I wanted to put this quote in here, which is, "It is both a blessing and a curse to feel everything so very deeply." Because I think it really sums up the variety of experiences that we can have with emotions quite nicely. You know, if we are experiencing a very sort of pleasant, positive emotion and feel that quite intensely, that can be a really wonderful experience to have. I'm thinking about the emotion of love, for example. Experiencing that really intensely can be a wonderful feeling. But feeling really strong guilt, anger, shame, anxiety can be a less pleasant experience. So I like this quote because it says it can be both a blessing and a curse to be able to feel things so intensely and deeply. I also want to point out that everyone is different in terms of their emotional vulnerabilities and the way their biology is when it comes to emotions. So just like some people have genetic predispositions to particular health conditions, like say diabetes, for example, we know that individuals can also have a predisposition to experiencing emotions more sensitively and with more intensity. So if you are someone who falls on that end of the spectrum where you do feel emotions quite intensely and often, and you maybe feel like you're on a bit more of a roller coaster ride in life than other people, there is often a very sort of biological or genetic component to it. And I think that's really important to highlight because very often people can place excess sort of blame on themselves if they see other people able to more easily sort of manage their emotions. People sort of think, why can't I do that? But in the same way where we wouldn't expect someone sort of with diabetes to manage without extra assistance, the same goes for people who experience emotions quite intensely and deeply as well. So one of the key things I'd like you to take away from this video and the messages that I'm going to be talking about when it comes to managing strong emotions is that the key goal is when we're trying to manage strong emotions, we're essentially trying to not make things worse. That's our goal. That's the outcome we're hoping for. So if we are experiencing really strong emotions, it's not the time to try to fix a situation, to try to go through a problem-solving process, or to be able to come up with practical solutions for what we're facing. We know that when we experience really strong emotions, the kind of rational part of our brain sort of shuts down a bit, and we're very much in what we call emotion mind. We're acting and thinking from a place of really strong emotion. And it's not necessarily the best place for us to do some of those higher order things like problem solve, for example. So when we're experiencing really strong emotions, our goal is simply to get through without making things worse for ourselves. I like to use the analogy of emotions being like a wave. So they start at a particular point, they will reach a peak, but eventually they will die down as well. So when we're in this state, our goal is to ride that wave of the emotion. Now, the reason I say we don't want to make things worse is that often when we are in a place of intense emotion, we tend to do things that might make us feel better in the moment, but are actually not so great in the long run. So for example, if I've had a really stressful day at work, or I've just found out that my partner has broken up with me, or I've been let go from my job, I might want to do something like make an angry phone call or send an angry text message, or I might want to drink alcohol, or there's a whole range of things I might do that are very driven from emotion, but really have the potential to make things worse for myself. So that's why our goal is just to not make things worse and just ride that wave of emotion for ourselves. Now, I like to sort of orient people to this notion of the traffic light signal. And this can be a really useful way for us to check in with ourselves and recognize where we are on a spectrum of emotion. And also, depending on where we are, what's most effective for us to do. So if we look at green zone on the traffic light signal, green zone is, it's what we aim for most of the time, essentially. It's not a zone where I would say we feel no negative emotions necessarily, or no difficult emotions, but rather we feel quite confident with our ability to cope well. So we feel like we're fluid and flexible enough to kind of go with what comes our way. It's not to say that there's nothing stressful or difficult that happens or that we feel, but we've got this flexibility about ourselves that we feel like we can cope. And overall, our feelings feel manageable. Not necessarily good or positive all the time, but they feel manageable. Then as we start to sort of go to the next level, we look at the sort of yellow amber zone in our traffic light. This is when we start to notice that we might have some difficult emotions building. Now, when we're in this zone of emotion, we absolutely can do those skills that require a cognitive element. So what I mean by that is we can do things like problem solving, or we can do things like challenging our thoughts to see if they're actually true and valid based on the facts of the situation. We can maybe do some mindfulness. There's a whole range of strategies that we can employ that may actually help us solve a problem in this state. So when I was talking about previously, our goal is to get through without making things worse, I'm not referring to yellow zone, because we actually are quite capable of thinking through our problems at this sort of yellow stage. It's when we get to the red zone that things change for us. When we're in red zone, our ability to think through and solve problems is really diminished. And I wouldn't even necessarily recommend we necessarily try to do it when we're in that zone. When we're experiencing those really strong emotions, it's hard to think rationally or logically. We are in emotion mind. So it's more useful for us to actually use a range of kind of sensory strategies, or a few other strategies that I'm actually going to talk you through today, because we aren't in the best place to kind of make good or long-term or effective decisions for ourselves. So if nothing else, it can be a really helpful exercise for people to just check in with themselves and think about where they are in terms of green, yellow, and red zone. This helps build our capacity to be self-aware, to be aware of our thought processes, to be aware of our emotions, and also to be aware of any urges for actions that are attached to those emotions and those thoughts as well. So the first sort of skill that DBT teaches us when trying to manage really intense and strong emotions and urges is the STOP skill. And it's almost as simple as what it sounds like. So STOP is an acronym, but the first part of our STOP skill is exactly that, to stop. Whatever we're doing, whatever sort of state we're in, whatever we're thinking, whatever we're about to do, we literally just want to put the brakes on and stop. Our T stands for taking a step back. Now, this can be metaphorically taking a step back, or it can physically be taking a step back. It might be that I need to sort of mentally take some space from whatever is going on, take a bit of a breather, take a bit of a break. But it may also be that if I am in a situation where I'm starting to feel intensely overwhelmed, that I do actually remove myself from that situation in that moment. So I'm physically taking a step back, or sort of stepping out of the room, or sort of stepping away, wherever that might be. O stands for observe. So this is where, if you've watched some of the other videos, we do sort of call on some of our mindfulness skills. Observing is an element of mindfulness where I just have a real sense of awareness of what's going on within me and around me. So I'm observing myself, my thoughts, my emotions, my urges in that moment, observing other people, observing the situation at hand. In this state, we're just noticing. We're not necessarily passing judgments. We're not trying to problem solve or make decisions. We're just really observing what's going on in as much of a non-judgmental way as we can. And then finally, our P is for proceed mindfully. Again, utilizing some of those mindfulness skills that we hopefully have. So we're able to stop, take a step away from whatever's going on, observe the situation both outside and within ourselves, and then proceed mindfully. Make a decision as to what's going to be most effective to do next. And that might be that we continue to take space away from wherever we've removed ourselves from, we go back into a situation, or perhaps even to utilize another skill, and we will go through some more. But this stop skill is very effective in being sort of that first point of just putting the brakes on, so that we can then make some sort of decision as to what happens next. DBT also teaches us another skill, which is this sense of accepts. So accepts, again, another acronym that we'll go through. Accepts can also help utilize ways to distract ourselves effectively. Now, I'm certainly not advocating for distraction as a long-term solution by any means for our emotions. However, again, when we're in the red zone, we're not in the best place to sort of problem solve a specific situation. And so in this red zone space, distraction can actually be an effective technique. And there's a number of ways in which we can do that quite effectively. But as I said, it's not a long-term strategy. We're most certainly not wanting to do distraction when we're in that sort of yellow, amber, kind of mild zone of emotions. We reserve it for when we're sort of at crisis point. So from our accept skills, A stands for activities. So it may be that if you are someone who experiences strong emotions quite regularly, you have a pre-planned list of activities that you can do in that moment that maybe doesn't require a whole lot of thought, that's quick and easy to do. So in engaging in some other activity. C stands for contributing. So it may be that if we're finding it hard to do something for ourselves, that we can do something for someone else. We can contribute in a way that feels meaningful, for example. The other C in accepts stands for comparisons. Now, sometimes for people, it can actually be really quite useful to compare themselves to a situation they've been in previously that was actually maybe much more difficult or equally as difficult, but they were able to cope and handle and get through the situation quite effectively. For some people, this can be quite effective in actually reducing the intensity of the emotion that they're feeling. If they're able to say to themselves, yes, I'm a 9 out of 10 when it comes to anxiety right now, but I've actually been here before in my life and I was able to get through it one way or another with some degree of effectiveness, so I can do it again. So that sort of self-reassurance that can come about. E in our accept skill stands for emotions. So this is looking at ways we can generate a different emotion to the one that I'm feeling. So for example, if I'm feeling quite intense sadness, is there some way I can generate a different or an opposite feeling? Is there some way I can generate a feeling of calm or happiness or excitement or whatever the emotion might be? And I might want to utilize things outside me to do that. So is it that I put on some music that might bring up a sense of, say, like happiness or joy in me? Or is it that I put on a funny movie or video on YouTube or something that can generate a different sort of emotion? Again, these are not long-term solutions. We certainly don't want every time we feel sad or anxious to sort of push that emotion away and just feel something else. But there is a time and a place where that can be effective, and it's when we're experiencing really strong emotions. P stands for pushing away. So sometimes this can actually be like mentally, putting whatever it is that I'm experiencing, say like in a box, and putting that on, in the imaginary cupboard or on an imaginary shelf somewhere. So it's essentially me compartmentalizing. Again, very effective in the short term when we're feeling very intense emotions, but certainly not a solution for when we're trying to problem solve through various situations. But there's certainly an effectiveness in being able to compartmentalize and detach from particular thoughts. Similarly with our T thoughts, we can also engage in competing thoughts to what's going on presently for us. So if we find that we are in some sort of thought spiral, we are just ruminating or worrying and can't seem to shake it, it can be effective to engage in sort of mental thought activities. So these are things like if I count backwards in sevens from 100, for example, or if I go through the alphabet and I come up with an animal for each letter of the alphabet. These can be really effective, again, in those sort of distressing crisis moments, because we can't really be thinking about the situation that's going on and sort of ruminating and doing some sort of thought process like these at the same time. So it gives us a bit of mental relief. And then finally, S stands for sensations. So this can be really effective from a sensory perspective to use the 5 senses in order to ground ourselves in the moment. So we do know that people have particular sensory preferences. So some people respond really well to particular smells. For other people, it's auditory things that can be quite soothing. For other people, it's visual. For other people, it's touch and the way things feel. So it might be worth just considering for yourself, do you have some sort of sensory preference? And in these moments, it might be doing something that can be quite soothing on a sensory level. So maybe it's I have a warm bath or a warm shower if the sort of touch or temperature really resonates for me. Perhaps it's I put on a scented candle or smell some of those incense that can be quite relaxing and soothing, or play some gentle music, whatever it is that you think might be most effective for you. And then finally, one more skill that I want to take you through when we're looking at distress tolerance. So essentially, how can I manage my distress and tolerate distress? Is the TIP skill. So again, another acronym. So T in this example stands for temperature. So one of the things that can be quite effective when we're in intense emotion, we can't think through things clearly, is to actually change our body temperature. So we're trying to change things on a physiological level. Because if you think about what happens when we're anxious or angry or feeling strong sadness, there might often be some sort of like very hot feeling in the body. Our heart rate might escalate, our blood pressure changes. All these things physiologically happen in the body. So the T part of the TIP skill is about changing our body temperature. Now, ultimately, the best way to do this would be what we call the deep dive reflex, which is essentially if you were to jump into a pool of water that was cold, you'd hold your breath and you'd feel the strong cold sensory sensation. And that physiologically actually changes how our body's working. But if we can't do that, which often we can't, it can also be effective to splash our face with cold water, perhaps hold ice cubes in our hand, open the freezer, let the really cold air hit your face. My favorite, if you've got an ice pack or a bag of frozen peas in the freezer, get those out. and put them over your forehead and temples. That's the sort of most effective place, and also perhaps under the eyes as well, where we really sort of experience that strong sensory sensation. Now, it's not necessarily a pleasant feeling to put sort of freezing cold ice pack on your face, but it's certainly effective if we're really struggling to manage our emotions, to just bring the intensity down a bit so that we can get to that yellow zone on the traffic light signal and then work our way through the rest of whatever we're experiencing. I stands for intense exercise. So again, we're trying to do something quite intense to match the intensity of the emotion. So if you don't have room to kind of run around, it could be star jumps on the spot or doing some push-ups. P stands for paced breathing. So again, there's many ways of doing paced breathing, but one way is, for example, to inhale for 2 to 4 seconds, hold your breath for about 4 seconds, and then exhale for about 4 to 6 seconds. So a longer exhale than we're having inhale. And then finally, we have progressive muscle relaxation. Now, if this is a new skill for you, then I recommend perhaps even having a look on YouTube or other resources. Essentially, progressive muscle relaxation is a technique where we go through different muscles in our body and we tense them and then relax them. So we can do it for all sorts of muscles in our body, where we practice tensing the muscles for a few seconds and then releasing it. And again, on a physiological level, this can have the effect of helping bring the intensity of our emotions down. So a few key takeaway points that I hope you take away from this video. Firstly, managing strong emotions is simply about that, managing them. We're not trying to solve problems. We're not trying to figure out solutions to particular situations. We're literally just focused on managing our feelings. We want to focus on what we need to do to get through that moment without making it worse. And I would love you to take away this analogy and image of emotions being like a wave. We are riding out the wave and the intensity of the emotion, knowing that eventually every feeling passes, every feeling will reduce in intensity, and eventually this sensation and this experience will be over. Our job is to just ride the wave until we get there. So hopefully this video has been helpful for you in thinking about some ways that you can manage really strong, intense emotions and how you can get through those feelings without making it worse. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful.